So what has all this experience for you taught you about yourself and about your mission and purpose or why in life? Has it helped formulate it or kind of expose it, take those layers back for you to say this is kind of how I want to devote myself in my life moving forward?
Yeah, it's really made me become just really think about myself and my motivation as you kind of go into something like this. I listened to one of your past podcast hosts, and he mentioned that starting a nonprofit is a 3-year process.
Yep.
In terms of the time that it takes to really go forth and build something like this, and I understand that having kind of gone through it. We're about a year and a half into ours since we kind of officially, or about 2 years now since we officially founded the nonprofit. And so through that time you have a lot of these challenges, and you have to come back and think, okay, why am I doing this? Is this having the impact that I want it to have? Is this really um, the way to go about solving this particular challenge? And through that process, there's a lot of introspection. There's a lot of, obviously, actually just looking around and understanding how your organization is working as you're bringing people into the organization, and you see where their passion is coming from, and how strong their devotion is to what you're doing. That really even makes you more want to redouble your efforts and try to support the group that you've brought together and started to build.
Hello, and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. I'm your co host, Andy McDowell, founder and owner of Generate Your Value, providing self leadership, and business coaching services for corporate executives and business owners.
And I'm Zach Levy, your other co-host. I run a nationwide financial service business with my wife, Megan.
Together, Zach and I have the intention to bring you tips, concepts, ideas, suggestions, stories, and analogies from A to Z, which will help you to grow your personal brand and leadership skills in such a way that joy, happiness, and success, as you define it for yourself, are achieved.
We hope to use our gifts, talents, and experiences in business and leadership to generate value in your life. And with that being said, let's move to our topic for today.
Hello, and welcome to the Generate Your Value podcast. My name is Andy McDowell, one of your co-hosts. Unfortunately, my co-host Zach Levy won't be joining us today. Got a great conversation for you today. We're going to go a little bit more on the business side as opposed to the leadership side today with the guests that I've brought in for us in our discussion. As if you're an avid listener of this podcast, you know that I'm a big fan of system of systems, strategic talk in business. And we're going to get into that a little bit in an industry that you're probably not thinking about right now. It's in the news all the time, but you don't really think about it from a business perspective. And I think that's going to be an instant element of our conversation today. So my guest today is Mr. Darrell Malone. Comes to us from Houston, Texas. And let me read his bio, and we'll bring him in and have a great conversation. So Darrell Malone is the founder and technology director of the National Police Data Coalition. He's a senior software engineer who has worked on projects in the digital identity space for customers such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Department of Homeland Security. Darrell's been involved in civic tech since 2017 when he founded the Tubman Project, an effort to spur the development of AI-powered tools for public defenders. His commitment to the protection of human rights and justice continues to drive his work in digital technology. So, Darrell, welcome to the podcast. Can't thank you enough for taking time out of your busy life to join us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. Happy to do it.
So, as I just mentioned for the listening audience, the justice system, we don't really think of that from a business perspective. We think of it from a civic side, something that the government function that takes care of us, trying to provide safety to members of the community. Let's start off as we typically do about life stories. So, if you could take a few minutes to fill our listening audience in on uh, elements of your life story and how it is that the justice system became of an interest to you.
Yeah. So the I kind of grew up with a big, just being steeped in a lot of the civic history of the United States. My my family were related to Malcolm X on my mother's side, or Malcolm Little as my grandmother knew him, and so we had kind of just this history in our family of being very active and engaged. I grew up, learning about the history of the struggle, reading like Langston Hughes and Du Bois and things like that. So it was always kind of in my mind as I grew up and started to work in the professional world. I'm a self-taught software engineer. Initially, kind of got into the space through gaming. Was very interested in wanting to develop games and create things in that way. Eventually, I got more interested in entrepreneurship kind of as I hit my 19, 20 years old. I started to really get interested in wanting to own my own business, start my own business, and learn more about that world. Moved to Austin, Texas, and kind of got engaged in the tech scene there. And once I kind of established a little bit of my career in the space, I went on to become a digital nomad and was basically, traveling the world. I spent 2 months back at home in Houston, Texas, and the rest of the time I was, out and about and learning and trying to understand as much about the world as I could, different languages, different cultures. I spent time in Europe, still had that same level of interest in the civic world. And so I saw kind of the different discussions that were happening there and how all of those countries managed the post World War II world, as there were empires turning into kind of nations and breaking apart into separate nations and things like that. And around that same time is when I started the Tubman Project. Um, at that time, I had been, you know, pretty the level of engagement that I'd had with the justice system was basically, more or less police. Like I've had a gun to my head 3 times in my life, different times with police officers, different places in the United States. And mind you, I'm a software engineer. My normal activities on the weekends are, board games and things like that. So
right.
Definitely an aberration. And so I kind of, from that and from the rest of my history, was really interested in this the world of the legal space. And so I started the Tubman Project, partially because I was really just interested in artificial intelligence technology. That was really more of a deep learning time. It was before we kind of knew what transformers would end up doing, but I was already really interested in the idea of AGI and of how more generalized systems might emerge and how they might work. And so to kind of get a grounding in the space, I wanted to try and apply something that would be, practical. So the justice system and the world of access to justice, to me, felt like something that was worth exploring and seeing what could be done there. And there were a lot of interesting things that I learned through that. I saw I kind of ran a lot of the hackathons, so I saw a lot of the different projects that came through. We had some things that were being done with computer vision and things that were being done in kind of the data security space. And so from there, when 2020 hit, that kind of made me even more focused on just the aspect of police and the role that they play in that world. It also gave me a real appreciation for the dearth of data and the lack of transparency that sometimes exists in the legal system. and that holds back the development of different things, and even the ability for attorneys to serve their role in kind of pushing back against unchecked government power and how that can impact people's lives. So that really kind of culminated in me starting the National Police Data Coalition, which is the project that I'm currently running, which is focused on exactly that area of data and of kind of being the last mile for really where I think the rubber hits the road, which is the legal system, and ensuring that they have access to data that's relevant to these kinds of questions of civil rights and justice.
So your family background kind of has a history on the legal, civic kind of side, but was it having a gun put to your head 3 times, or was there some other major life event that really kind of moved you into a focus with the justice side with your IT skills?
I mean, probably the biggest life event and focusing point was certainly 2020, and the George Floyd protests and everything that was happening there. I that had an impact in my life on a number of ways. It was right during the pandemic, so like everybody else, I was impacted. In fact, since I was a digital nomad at the time, I was actually living in Berlin, Germany. And I had been in the process actually of becoming a permanent resident. But just with everything that was going on with COVID and everything like that, I decided to come back home, spend more time at home. And because of that, I was kind of there in Houston when a lot of the really turmoil was happening. Those who are kind of familiar with the situation know that George Floyd had a really strong connection to Houston. He was really kind of from the community here. And so, the people, all of the people living here in Houston were really incensed, about this. And Houston's a place with really a lot of Black wealth and power. It's one of these places that in a sense, kind of because of the light touch that was taken here and just the number of Black residents that were here post, civil rights and Reconstruction and everything like that, just had become this real, there was a lot of this political action and energy that was going on here, which at the time I wasn't fully aware of. I wasn't as entrenched in the community, but I already was seeing kind of the action that was being taken. And then that combined with the experiences that I had just made me ask questions and start thinking about what was there something that could be done kind of with my skills and technology to help in this particular problem. I kind of wanted to, I heard the call and I was like, is there something that I can do here? And through that engagement and through those discussions, that's really what led me to the place that I am now with the organization.
Yeah, well, the listening audience knows I live in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I think Atlanta is a lot like Houston from the perspective that we have a lot of Black wealth here in the African American community is very active in the politics and the civic side. From that perspective, so I kind of have an idea of what Houston is like. So what has all this experience for you taught you about yourself and about your mission and purpose or why in life? Has it helped formulate it or kind of expose it, take those layers back for you to say, this is kind of how I want to devote myself in my life moving forward?
Yeah, it's really made me become, just really think about myself and my motivation as you kind of go into something like this. I listened to one of your past podcast hosts, and he mentioned that starting a nonprofit is a 3-year process.
Yep.
In terms of the time that it takes to really go forth and build something like this, and I understand that having kind of gone through it. We're about a year and a half into ours since we kind of officially, or about 2 years now since we officially founded the nonprofit. And so through that time, you have a lot of these challenges, and you have to come back and think, okay, why am I doing this? Is this having the impact that I want it to have? Is this really the way to go about solving this particular challenge? And through that process, there's a lot of introspection. There's a lot of, obviously, just looking around and understanding how your organization is working as you're bringing people into the organization, and you see where their passion is coming from, and how strong their devotion is to what you're doing. That really even makes you more want to redouble your efforts and try to support the group that you've brought together and started to build. And so, me coming from really, obviously, being a software developer, the type of person who goes into that field, especially, apropos of nothing, like not coming into it, oh, I wanted to learn about this in college and things like that, but just through curiosity, as someone who's pretty comfortable spending a lot of time alone, being very happy just going through documentation and just trying different things, and living in a very mental world, and going from that into founding a nonprofit, which is an extremely social act, right? One of the biggest challenges that I have is like posting on social media, because it's super important. You've got to do it, but at the same time, I'm a pretty private guy in my normal life. So there are a lot of these aspects of myself that I'm trying to learn to embrace and bring out, and become more comfortable with. That has definitely come from really engaging in this, and it taught me a lot about where I was before, where I considered myself pretty outgoing, from my kind of personal milieu and context, but I really had to learn what it means to lead, and how much work that I had to do to develop that skill, and to really be refined in that sense in order to get this organization to where I want it to be and where I think it could be.
Yeah, and I think you're at the stage where a lot of people that weren't really exposed to leadership, maybe at a very young age, they think of leadership, they think of the title, they think of the salary, they talk about sort of the authority side of leadership by what that title gives you, but they don't know a whole lot about influence, and how is it from leadership you've got to establish a vision and get people engaged into that vision and make sure everybody's walking down the same path in the park, so to speak, to get you to where you're going. And I think that's the most difficult side of leadership for people to really embrace and get their hands around, because it's work. Right? When you're dealing with human beings of all different personalities, and see leadership in different ways, you've got to figure out a way to maneuver around that so that everybody gets lined up on the same page.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate those guys like the Steve Jobs or the Elon Musk, who can really hold a vision. And I picked those as examples because theirs were kind of on the more extreme sense, right? In terms of the way that they were reshaping how people looked at some of the various objects in their lives, and to build an organization of people that can see that with you and follow you in that process
Mm-hmm.
is a really difficult, task to really know how to communicate that and get that solid enough that people can really put, hours of their time day after day towards it.
Yeah, and the main thing out of it that I coach my clients on is you have to be able to answer the question why.
Yeah,
So we're
absolutely.
doing this, and here's our strategy. Okay, why? Because people need to understand the why to then figure out how they fit into the picture.
Yeah,
Because nobody wants to waste their time. They want to understand their contribution to the cause, and uh, in order to do that, they have to understand the why we're doing this, and then they can fit themselves into the story, so to speak, of what that why is. Okay, let's move away from you and start talking about your coalition and what you're trying to achieve. I know when you and I got together in our sort of pre-recording meeting, we had a conversation about system of systems, which is a favorite topic of mine. In my Boeing days, I was trying to get Boeing to buy into this notion and really embrace it in order to build or have new business opportunities. And system of systems is really trying to take different actors within an ecosystem. So for mine, it was the whole aviation system. For you, you're looking at the whole justice process or justice
right.
system that has different actors. Like mine had different actors, and each of the actors is creating different data or different content that participates or is used in the ecosystem. Um, and not all actors have access to the data that's being created by the other actors. That if they had that information in their hands, they might be able to make better decisions.
Right.
And so they're
Yeah,
not
it's
making perfect decisions because they don't have access to all that data. Would that be an accurate description of what you're facing in your nonprofit to trying to address?
yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And I think people the the justice system is in essence kind of an information gathering game, right? It's the different parties that it establishes an adversarial system so that different parties come to the table. They come to a judge who's there to kind of analyze and understand the evidence and then issues a ruling that will then inform future judges in future cases about how the world
And
works,
is in the
right?
best public
And what is
and is
the
in the best public
right
interest.
exactly,
Yep.
and what is going to be in the public
Yep.
interest. And so that that process really is informed in prime part by the attorneys who work there. They're the ones who manage the teams that bring those facts to bear. From my perspective, looking at the system and how difficult it was in some cases for people to actually get justice through that system when the kind of damage to justice was coming from the government itself. Um, it just became evident how almost the pipes were set in such a way that there were built-in clogs. So, taking just the criminal defense system for example, right? If you look in a place like Massachusetts, they have a statewide public defender system. And what that means is that all of the public defenders are kind of linked. They're able to share information on cases, and as things happen, they're able to deal with it. There was, just to give you an example, a woman called Annie Dugan, who was a crime lab scientist who was found to have falsified evidence against people,
Mm-hmm.
just to make cases go through faster and just, that sort of thing. She would falsify evidence and say that there were, traces of DNA where there weren't, things like that. Um, So naturally, once that came to light, there had to be an effort to go through those cases of people that she had helped put away and understand whether they were really meant to be there or not. Were they actually guilty of the crimes? Um, the the district attorney went through, did their examination, and said, okay, here are the people we found that have been impacted, by this particular scientist. And because they had a connected system, the Massachusetts public defender system was able to come back at that and say, hey, we have actually the records of the cases that have actually gone through this, that were prosecuted by this DA. And we can see that there are all of these missing people that haven't been found. And, perfectly could have been a clerical error. There are a lot of ways that something like that could happen. But because you have this ability for kind of the advocates of the people at large to make a case to try and get justice, they were able to make it happen, right? In a system like Texas, where I live, for example, that couldn't happen, right? So we have an indigent defense commission that exists here, but at the same time, there's not anywhere near the level of coordination possible and data sharing possible to make those kinds of things happen. So to have that same level of ability to ensure that the right thing is done, you'd have to get universities involved, you'd have to get all of these other actors kind of there, which most likely is going to happen long after the damage has been done, right? And keeping people that should have been free imprisoned for much longer than really needed to happen. And keep in mind, even in the justice system right now, a lot of the people that are in prison are actually pretrial. We have an issue here in Houston where we're having to, or Harris County, I should say, where we're having to send people, often to other states, to Louisiana and now Mississippi, because we've got so many people here that, many of whom are pretrial. They haven't even actually had a chance to have their day in court. That's, another issue kind of onto itself, but it just becomes imperative to make sure that you have this level of transparency available so that we can prevent this kind of damage that gets done to people, because these are people's lives. This is this could be people either losing their lives, losing their freedom, kind of being held up in the system, unable to get jobs, and the amount of just personal damage that gets done when you have these breaches is, I mean, to me, it's intolerable. And so that that ability for attorneys to have that complete picture so that they can actually prevent these kinds of abuses from happening is the goal that we're trying to achieve with our organization. Both in the sense of having the kind of the criminal defense aspect of it, of being able to prevent people from getting sentences that they shouldn't have got, and those sorts of things, but also on the other end, the civil rights side, where people can then go and get back damages when they actually have had things happen. Both of these to me are the places where the rubber hits the road in terms of actual policy change. That's where you start speaking the language that becomes really easy for governments to understand, and you can make a case for, hey, if we don't solve this, we're actually having real damage being done to the citizens of the city, the budgets and things like that. That really pushes for change to happen. So for me, that's really where the legal system, why it's so important to the world, because that is the system for understanding and making better decisions and better policy decisions going forward.
Yeah, in my world in aviation, I was pushing for this kind of approach, such that in the air traffic control world, we would move from a reactive culture to a proactive culture, right? So traditionally in air traffic control, a controller doesn't start dealing with an aircraft until it actually arrives in this sector, because he doesn't have access to any information prior to that event, if you will, occurring. But if you start building a platform that connects all these actors together, they have access to information about that flight before it even hits the sector, that he can start influencing the trajectory of that aircraft before it hits the sector, such that a more efficient outcome happens for all parties involved in that sector. So I'd have to imagine that kind of approach in your world, in the justice world, is not only for better decision making and better outcomes for the public and for individuals, it's also for ethical reasons, it's for transparency, it's for holding people accountable. Because I have to imagine, tell me if I'm wrong here, you may have some actors that don't even create the content or even would even put it in the system if they thought it's not going to fit their agenda, right? In other
Right.
words, there has to be policy, laws, rules, processes that says if this piece of information is created or becomes available, you have to put it in the system and make it available to all parties that have access to the system in order for the outcomes that you want to be achieved to actually happen.
Yeah, actually, a great example of this. So there's a prosecutor in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, and he came kind of. There are a lot of when you're elected as a DA, they're kind of in a sense become these two dichotomies. You have people who are coming more from the prosecutorial background, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have people who are coming from the world of public defense and
Defense.
things
Yep.
like that, or have some history there.
Yep.
Larry Krasner was one who came from more of the public defender angle, and one of the things that he did was he was able to release what they call a Brady list. So police officers, if they have any sort of misconduct or any breach of rights of civilians, it's generally what's called a Brady violation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a blanket term for these kinds of things. And so most, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of DAs in larger cities will put together Brady lists that have lists of officers who are known to maybe have some troubled history and things like that. These are not made available to the public. I think they're very interesting information to the public for sure, and most certainly to the public defenders. Um, but they're not always released, and indeed, they're not even kind of claimed by the DAs that have them for exactly the reason that you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't want to release content that's going to hurt your case. And, in an adversarial system, that makes sense, right?
Yep.
You kind of have this process through which, you have privacy and laws that protect you and communications between your attorney, right? There are obviously understandings. You have the Fourth Amendment. There's an understanding that some level of privacy is necessary in society, but at the same time, what we didn't have was anything on the other side that actually had the level of coordination and purpose behind it that you have, for example, in a DA, and you take that all the way up to the Department of Justice as a whole. So the goal of this organization was really to be that counterbalance, right? To act as an independent source of information about police performance, and about the access that the public should have to police data.
Can you give our listening audience an idea of how underserved this kind of notion is in the justice world, and an idea of how long is this pole in the tent, so to speak, that you're going after? Is this we've got great participation in this part of the country and not so much over here, or is it like the whole flipping country's in bad shape and we've got a long road to hoe here before we achieve our goals?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a ton of interest. A lot of it spurred by kind of the events of 2020. Naturally,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a funny. So there was a study that I read recently about the impact that protest has on public policy, and the findings were essentially that there's about a 2-year impact for a protest that feels sufficiently localized, and that has real engagement from that community. So that's about the time that you have a lot of action take place, um, when you have something like George Floyd or some of the more local protests that happen. Um, that's kind of led to the situation where we have now, where places that had the political alignment to actually push things through do some of that whenever these events happen, and then other places where that power doesn't exist, very little happens. So you have, for example, New York, which has passed 50A laws that make it required for a lot of police departments and things like that to release this data. And so we have seen a lot of this data be released in New York State. And then you have places such as Texas, and I just keep using it because I happen to live here. I know a lot about the political situation here. Um, Nothing against Texas, love the state and everything like that. But being a border state and being more of a red state, it becomes a lot harder to have that level of action. So, you have correspondingly not the same level of transparency that exists in some of these places. And there are some that work hard to do that. Chris Vallejo in Austin, I actually share a board with him. In another context, Texas Justice Initiative. But the Austin PD has worked hard to work on transparency. Houston Police Department has been vocal in some senses, and has worked to try and release data. That can't be said for the majority of police departments around the country, but we're working hard to try and establish those relationships. One of my goals really is to try and establish that we're not out for any particular agenda. We're out for transparency for its own sake, right? And so part of the idea behind creating a coalition was really to bring all of the different people who are interested in data about police departments to the table, so we can work on common standards, common understanding, and make sure that we have a common language for dealing with the problem. Because to me, I think it is a problem that we all have a stake in. We all want to have a system of policing that's both effective, but also like prevents doing more damage than it's setting out to cause.
Yeah.
Crime is a real problem. We don't want to have it. We want to have order, in our society. But crime can also be committed by people who have badges.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that we have to grapple with as well. So we need to make sure that we have this ability to deal with crime, both of the official capacity as well as in the private sector.
Well, I think as long as the Justice Department is driven by human beings, we have to deal with human being behaviors and motivations and egos and everything of that nature. We're going to be faced with this problem. So,
Absolutely.
what in areas of privacy? I have to imagine that's one of the things that your coalition is grappling with in terms of uh, privacy of victims, privacy of those that are accused, uh, and so forth. How high of a level is privacy concerns in the coalition in terms of what's trying to be achieved? I have to imagine it's all
I
like the
mean,
medical industry, right? You've got privacy concerns.
Absolutely. I mean, from the very beginning, that was kind of the paramount issue, right? You're dealing with, people who are in probably some of the most stressful situations they're going to be in their lives.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of these systems like policing or like healthcare, where you have these are not going to be your best moments necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so privacy obviously is huge, both for the officers and for the civilians involved. One of the biggest things that one of our kind of guiding lights is that things for us should be taken care of through the justice system. That is of critical importance, and so we have no interest in participating in any form of retaliation, both of officers or of civilians who might be represented in the data.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This idea that we become this kind of library where people can then go and look up people they have grievances against and things like that is absolutely um, the number one thing that we want to avoid. So that's one of the primary concerns that we have, just from that aspect, is just making sure that people in general are protected. People aren't at risk of losing job opportunities or of being harassed or anything like that if they're seen as victims or of people who have reported incidents, and things like that. And likewise, we don't want police officers to have anything against them when they're doing their jobs and when most of them are trying their best to do things the right way. So that's a primary concern because of the world that we're operating within, the legal system. There are also data privacy concerns that come into it from that angle. I just mentioned the right to privacy, between yourself and your attorney. There are different laws around how data can be released about things that come from police departments and things like that. That changes, between states and all of that. There are different ways that Freedom of Information Act can be used, and that applies. So just anything kind of operating within that legal context, you have a lot of these challenges that come through and that we've really taken head on, and was really kind of our first goal was to understand how we can approach these issues and develop our technology in a way that is supportive of people's privacy all the way through.
Yeah. So what kind of resistance have you faced in talking about this notion to the actors, if you will, in the system? I know when I approached and talked to airlines about participating in a system of systems data sharing approach for air traffic control, their biggest concern was the release of what they consider to be competitive information to other airlines. And so that's one form of resistance that I faced in trying to push this notion within the aviation industry. So, in the coalition, where have you faced resistance or have had concerns from actors that might participate in it?
Yeah, we've had a fair amount of support from a lot of the people that we've been engaged with, from people in kind of the Department of Justice, from people who are former police officers, people who are attorneys in the space and things like that. Um, I would say the concerns that I have heard have been a lot of times just from people that I have discussions with, talking about the project and the work that we do and everything like that. I haven't gotten a lot of official pushback yet. We're relatively young, and I'm cognizant that could change at different points and times. But at least for now, we've been able to be good about kind of communicating what we're doing in a way that we haven't gotten a lot of that. The concerns that I do get are generally around kind of what I mentioned before, this idea about maybe not so much retaliation, but that Officers could be, unfairly maligned and things like that. Are we taking paying enough attention to the positive things that happen and things of that nature? That's been primarily where people have been concerned, and for that, I just say that our organization again is not necessarily tied to finding any particular outcomes in data. Our interest is really in providing infrastructure for these conversations to happen, and a place for that discussion to take place in an environment that's really secure, and prevents a lot of the potential negative externalities of that debate taking place, right? So the from an official standpoint, we haven't had, for example, any legal battles yet in terms of whether we're allowed to work in particular areas, and I know that those are challenges that a lot of groups face and that have fought, and generally, there's been a lot of positive movement when they make those challenges. One of our advisors, just for example, is out of Chicago, and they had a long series of struggles with the Chicago Police Department to get data released. This was the Invisibles Institute, which founded the Citizens Public Data Project there in Chicago. So there's we have a lot of legal frameworks that are on our side in this sense of working towards this idea of transparency and of public interest data being available to the public, that I want to really leverage and make sure that we're a part of having a more transparent democracy. I think that's should be uncontroversial.
Well, I think that sort of gets to the heart or the root of the whole Freedom of Information Act conversation and foundation, right? So, one of our concerns in building an aviation foundational system, right, is one of your actors is the government, because it's the government function that's managing the resource or the asset, the actual airspace that users are using. So now you have to, from a policy perspective, from a legal perspective, you're asking questions of you want to keep it as a closed system per se for security reasons in the daily operations of it, but how much do you allow the public to come in and really get into the minutia of
Right.
what's happening? And I could see that would be a concern as well on this justice system kind of data sharing platform, where you want to keep it tight and internal so that the system can function well for the court system and so forth. But how much do you really open the lid per se to all the minutia of details in it to the public, where the
Right.
public can come in and really stir the pot on things, so to speak, and can really bring the system and the purpose of the system to a grinding halt
Right.
because of bureaucracy and their desire to want to know things that as an end game doesn't really cause the system to improve. It's just noise that
Right.
brings the system to a halt.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons we tend to focus on the legal community, because that is really their role is to engage in that process and to marry that raw data with understanding of the laws and processes of the country. As you might imagine, I'm also very much a systems thinker. That is 100% the way that I approach the world. So to me, I look at the justice system as a process and with these constituent parts, and trying to understand how you get good information in order to get, the right outcomes out. And having transparency available, obviously is of primary importance to me. I'm not a big fan of the idea of creating kind of these walled gardens, and the idea that, the people, they have a right to know, but they shouldn't know too much, and that sort of thing. But at the same time, you do want to operate in a way that allows the justice system to actually do its job.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And even within that, we have this understanding that, there are certain ways that we need to protect that process. There are laws around how juries are able to behave. There are laws around how different people are able to impact that process, rules for when judges need to recuse themselves because of things that may exist in their backgrounds, or ways in which communications need to be protected. So all of that is kind of something that we've worked on as a nation for little over 200 years now, and I certainly, having studied the history of what just that semi-scientific process has been able to achieve and allow human beings working within it to achieve, I've got a lot of respect for that, and my hope is that this same system will carry us through the challenges that we face on into the future, and by I want to do my little part to improve that process if I can.
Yeah, I think at some point you're going to have to answer the question about some kind of independent oversight, so that those power struggles don't exist, or manipulation in whatever processes gets established. We're
Right.
very fortunate in the aviation side that we have a division of the United Nations, headquartered up in Montreal, Canada, that works in that kind of function with representation from all the countries to establish the standards, international standards for aviation flight.
Right.
And is a sounding board for anybody can bring a concern up, just like at the United Nations in New York City, work through the issues, make changes to standards to address the issues, and keep moving forward and growing from that standpoint. And if we move to this kind of system over on the justice side, is there some kind of federal and then eventually international organization that can be that independent, like ICAO is on the aviation, and the UN is on the aviation side, that can help maintain the integrity, if you will, of such a system?
Yeah, it's tough because the you want to have that oversight exist in such a way where it actually can serve that function.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of oversight bodies, including the one that we have here in Houston, where we've got a civilian oversight and review board, has absolutely no power, has absolutely no teeth, right, and therefore has no impact. And we see that at all levels. Go all the way up to the United Nations, right, where a lot of people see that as a talking shop that doesn't actually have any impact and ability to solve problems, because it actually doesn't have the authority, finally, to solve problems, right? At the end of the day, the constituent nations are going to do what they're going to do. And there's not so much you can do about that unless you're going to apply hard power to change that. So I think that the challenge of our time is really to come to some sort of ability to tackle these tough ethical challenges that are really paramount right now. You have this um, story of a system coming across the physical boundaries of the world. You think about the idea of climate. You think about the idea
Mm-hmm.
of how population impacts that, and how the way that we live as a whole and in certain parts of the world can impact the way people live in other parts of the world. There is a challenge, built into that, for how do we actually move to the next stage, and how do we actually allow ourselves to live together on this planet sustainably,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is just, that I think is being fought out right now. And my hope is that we can, come to that new equilibrium in a peaceful manner. The idea that we have another war to come to a new system. What's the point?
Right.
Who's going to be there? Who's going to be there after that? So we've got to find a way to solve these tough ethical challenges and create these systems that can make these decisions in a way that's respected by everybody who has to obey those
Mm-hmm.
rules, and um, respected enough that all are subject to the same laws in the same way, right? Whether that's at whatever scale that is. We can't live in a world where might makes right.
Right.
We can't keep going in a world where makes right, and just the ability to have the power to enforce what you say is the only thing that matters. We do have to start to come to a place where we feel comfortable creating bodies that will be those arbiters, that have buy-in from all of the different parties,
Yep.
and are able to make determinations.
Yep.
And so for our context in the United States, we hope to be a part of that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. We hope to be a part of establishing some way that the people are also involved in the conversation of how they are policed, with some power to make changes to the way that is applied.
Mm-hmm.
Right now that's very indirect. We can elect a DA, we can elect people who will then appoint other people who are tasked with these problems, but we don't necessarily have this sort of bottom up ability to impact and improve the way policing takes place. And that's going to have to come with a lot of trust from people in positions of power, that if they allow for more of that outside inspection and independent inspection and influence over how those decisions are made, that we're still going to have a safe and coherent society on the other end.
Yep.
I think that's um, you know it's something that I think our leaders should have the courage to do. To really embrace the idea of democracy, that is the rule by the demos, by the people.
Mm-hmm.
That we actually have the ability to be involved in this conversation at a high level. We have this uh, just this consistent issue of not of being afraid of this specter of populism, or of this different way of approaching problems, um, that results over and over in these kind of surprise elections and all of these different things that people are shocked about. um, and in a sense, what has been so interesting to me is how often the kind of general idea for how to approach things, which may not necessarily get the kind of time on the airwaves that it should, has often been kind of on the right side of history. And as we've looked back and as we've gone through and seen some of the different issues that we've faced as a country and how we could have solved those things and how we end up solving those things, we find that, the people kind of had a good idea of what the right approach was. I truly believe that the more we start to open up these systems and allow for public involvement, the better it gets, whether that's kind of participatory budgeting and kind of the ways that happens, all the way up to the systems that we've been talking about.
Well, I think our system's been set up. When I think about the business world, in Boeing, we used the words responsibility, accountability, and authority. And the responsibility, accountability, and authority for a citizen of this country in the republic that we have set up, the Democratic Republic, is we're responsible to place a vote one day every 4 years. Nobody holds us accountable to it. Nobody says you have to show up to vote. It's your responsibility as a citizen, but nobody holds you accountable. And your authority is simply to place a vote. And in the collection of votes, we're putting all of our trust in the majority meaning the majority of the votes, pick somebody to be our representative that we're giving full trust in to go up and represent us in the government and make all the decisions. So I think there's a lot of frustration in our country right now with the way things are going up in DC, but all we can do is talk about it because our authority only comes one day out of every 4 years to place that vote.
I mean, I would actually challenge that.
Okay.
I think that one of the reasons that I really started this organization, and this is not to say that everybody should go and found a nonprofit tomorrow and everything like that, but to me, civic action has to be more than just a vote. It has to be more than just a vote. There was the people who founded this country were interested in politics and the ideas around this already on their own, kind of through their experience, kind of being here. They were having those discussions. And I think that the idea that you have a society that is engaged, in a real way with these challenges and these questions, is a beautiful thing. That's a thinking society. Mm-hmm. That's a society that's actually coming to better and better positions over time. And that has to be done on a regular basis. I would actually be in favor, and I've heard kind of some big name people references. I think the most recent surprising one to me was Martin Wolf, writer for the Financial Times. He recently came out with a book that had kind of this concept embedded within it. But a jury system, some level of a jury system for policy creation, right? Where you have this, let's say, a House of Representatives that is chosen by kind of a jury lottery. And so that you have a real assortment of different perspectives and ideas, providing, if nothing else, some level of assent to policies as they're being passed and things like that. That, to me, I think would almost bring home the idea that, yes, you have rights, but you also have responsibilities. And I think that's extremely important.
Yes.
Being part of a democracy is a responsibility.
Yes, it is.
You have a responsibility to your society to be engaged and inform yourself on what's going on and how, you're impacted and impact others.
Yep. But I think that's the part that's being lost. That was part of what I was trying to say in my comments earlier, is that we do have a responsibility, but because they're not really held accountable in any kinds of ways. There are a lot of us that don't act responsibly and being informed enough when it is time to go vote, or to be influential on the non-voting days, to express an opinion, to help people understand, uh, to voice an opinion that helps shape the direction and the future of the country. That it's all of our
Absolutely correct.
responsibility as a citizen to be active in that in appropriate ways. And I
100%.
think that's part of the reason why we've kind of lost our way and why we have such a divisive country right now is that we don't have enough people that are being responsible enough on non-voting days to be active in what kind of country we want.
Yeah. Yeah, and it becomes really hard. We do have a real fire hose of information that we have available to us
Mm-hmm.
now. We have these different and algorithm systems to try and navigate that. But you know,
The problem is trying to
it's
figure out what is truth and what is not. Much
exactly,
like what you're facing
exactly.
in the coalition about putting data out there is to make sure it's all factual and truthful, so that appropriate decisions can be made. We would face the same thing, and are facing the same thing today as to what is factual and what is not.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. We have to have a system for kind of interpreting that.
Mm.
And while the legal system does some of that in these specific cases and kind of in the framework that's put together for that, in the public sphere, the media is a big part of that process. Which of course we also have them engaged in the coalition as well. Um, so I have some understanding of what's going on there, and the real challenges that exist even in that space, in even just upholding journalistic integrity.
Mm.
We used to have this world of journalism where you were expected to have multiple sources that you could call on for a story and things like that. And nowadays, you get something unofficial from somebody high up, and that's enough to go and run a story that months later turns out, oh yeah, that was complete BS, and
Mm-hmm.
we've told that to millions of people over the airwaves for months and months and months. Um, and there's no accountability for that. There's no in that space as well ability for um, that turnover to happen, for that change to happen, and for those processes to be improved. Um, and I think that what ends up happening is people who are engaged, who are interested, go and they create new organizations and new institutions that effectively push the older ones out of their positions. Um, and I think that's a healthy process. It's something that needs to happen. Um, but you know, it's fraught. It's difficult. It's difficult to create these sorts of things, and it's going to take a lot of us really being willing to spend those years to start a business, to start an organization, to understand that process, and bring people together for that to happen.
Well, I could talk to you for hours on this stuff, but unfortunately, our time has come to a close. So, what is the best way if somebody wanted to help you with a coalition or engage with you to understand more about what's going on and so forth? What's the best way they could connect with you, Darrell?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on most platforms under the username Darrell K Malone, two R's, two L's, and that's Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. You can find me there. You can find our organization at nationalpolicedata.org. You can join kind of our mailing list there. We also have listings for the different volunteer opportunities that we have available, whether that's coming from the technical aspect, designers, software engineers. We build a lot of our technology in the open source, so you're able to contribute to us in that way. as well as, we have internships that we make available and things of that nature as well, for people who are more kind of on the organization building or the legal or the data aspect of things. So definitely check us out there, join the newsletter, and be on the lookout for different opportunities that we post there. Police Data Cole is the social media handle for that organization. And yeah, we'd be happy to work with you.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and informing and engaging with us with the listening audience to understand what you're trying to achieve. I think it's great things. But we have one last question for you. It's a question we ask all of our guests. At the very end, we like to collect all the answers and see where that golden thread, that runs through all the answers is. But the last question for you today, Darrell, is what do the words generate your value mean to you?
So generating your value is kind of taking stock of what it is that you can bring to the world, the positive impact that you can have on other people's lives, and doing the work to make that a reality. And if you are willing to do that, if everybody's willing to do that, I think that we get to a much better place. That to me is where the value comes. It's the benefits that you can bring and how you can help those around you.
Yeah, through your relationships, through your work, through your products and services as a business, there's different shapes, colors, and sizes to the value that you can generate in the world. Absolutely. So for the listening audience, I can't thank you enough for tuning in to Darrell and I's conversation today. I don't know about you, but I learned a lot. We actually went a lot longer than I anticipated today in our conversation, just because just having a good time, enjoying getting to know something more about the justice system and the country we live in, and where the areas of difficulty and challenges exist in order to create the purest form that we can in terms of a fair and a just system for the citizens of our country. So this episode's releasing during the holidays. We're hoping your holidays are going great. It's full of joy and happiness in your life. From that perspective, we're here every week with a new episode, bringing you guests just like Darrell we did today, to bring you new information, new insight into life in ways that we hope you can take away and integrate into your own life and create a life of joy, happiness, and success for yourself. So that being said, have a great day, have a great week, and we'll see you next time here on the Generate Your Value podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for joining us today on this episode of the Generate Your Value podcast. If you find our conversations to be useful in your life, I invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode.
You can find me online at Instagram at _Zach.Levy, Facebook, and LinkedIn.
For information on my coaching services, visit my website at www.generateyourvalue.com. You can also find me and my company on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, and Instagram. Simply search for Generate Your Value on those platforms.
Once again, thanks for joining us for today's podcast, and we invite you to generate your value in this world.